Welcome in here to another episode of Three True Values. I'm your host, James Fletcher, and we've got a lot to break down on today's show. Here in the first segment, we're going to be talking about the ACC SEC Challenge. We're going to break down the results. We're going to talk about what it means for both sides, both conferences, and then the teams involved as well. We're going to go kind of game by game and tell you what you need to take away from each of those matchups. In the second segment, we're going to hit rewind a little bit. Last week, of course, with Thanksgiving, we recorded early. We did not get to talk about the championship games in the Players Era Festival, particularly Michigan over Gonzaga in a blowout and Kansas over Tennessee. So we'll break down those just a little bit in the second segment. And then we'll wrap up today's show as we do in the third segment. We're going to give you a little bracketology update, keep you up to date on the latest on what is going on in the bracket, where the movement is coming from, what it means, and then we will get you out of here as we do always with the games of the week. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being part of the show. Please continue to like, share, subscribe wherever it is you get this podcast, because we do appreciate the numbers continuing to rise steadily throughout the season. Let's talk about ACC SEC Challenge. Last year, this event was extremely lopsided and really, I thought, represented what has been going on between these two conferences. The SEC had been on a constant rise towards history and made history last season, obviously, with the most NCAA tournament bids by a single conference in history. They dominated the non-conference schedule, not just this challenge, but a winning percentage that was ridiculous between November through the end of December. SEC teams just didn't lose very often. This year, back to earth a little bit. They're still a good conference, but no teams in the top 10 at KenPom right now. They struggling in some of these big marquee matchups. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about some of these top teams and what it means. But it was important, I thought, for the ACC to get back up into the mix. The SEC still wins this challenge 9-7 across the 16 games that were played. But in that, I think that it was still a win relative to past seasons for the ACC. I thought that there was a lot of competitive games. There were a lot of results that went the ACC's way that were important to how they look, not just on the bubble, not just in the top seeds of the NCAA tournament, but across the board as we are evaluating the strength of this conference at the end of the year. Conference to conference comparisons are something that matters on Selection Sunday. If you've got, we'll use an SMU who took a loss in this challenge, and at the end of the season, you're evaluating, okay, do we want to put them in the NCAA tournament or say in Oklahoma? Which one of those, if all of the numbers are very similar, the quadrant system looks very similar, where are we going to lean now? I think that it is very fair for them to look and evaluate, how did this team perform in non-conference matchups against opponents from that conference that this other team plays in? Well, that can skew things, that can change how you view it. The overall strength of the conference as well, it matters. It impacts strength of record, it impacts wins of a bubble, it impacts all these computer metrics in some way. And so it's something that will continue to be a conversation. The ACC obviously invested big this season in writing some of these things, only getting 3, sometimes 4 bids into the NCAA tournament over the past few years. That's something that they had to correct. They have gone out, they have invested in coaching talent, they have invested on the floor with players, infrastructure across the board. We are seeing ACC programs commit long-term to fixing the problems that they had over these past couple of years, and we're seeing more teams in the mix, more competitive teams in these big time games. So let's get into the results. Let's talk about specifically which of these games mattered to which teams. We'll start on Tuesday, and I want to look at Syracuse knocking off Tennessee because I thought it was a little bit of a letdown for the Volunteers, who we'll talk about another loss that they took in the past week in the second segment, but just a missed opportunity to continue building their resume, to continue rising up the board in these conversations, to get into that top 16 conversation, to establish themselves as one of those teams in the mix to continue rising up the board, continue making a move toward the 1 seed line. Slip there, one that could really hurt them because these teams that are at the top, they are not dropping games. We still see quite a few undefeated teams in that mix. And those who have taken losses have generally been to each other. It's been teams taking losses to other teams considered elite in this setting. So for Tennessee, you've got one big win on your resume. We talked about the Houston win last week, but then the loss to Kansas, that one's not going to kill you, but a loss to Syracuse, a team that's hoping to get into the bubble conversation, not going to do anything for you as you keep putting yourself into those bigger conversations. For Syracuse, though, it moves you close to the bubble. That's very important for this team that is rebuilding. This is a program that is kind of hitting reset. They're trying to get back to where they used to be, have not been a perennial NCAA team in quite a few years now. Can they get back up into that conversation? Can they continue to string together a couple of these big resume wins, these quad one opportunities, and start to crack into the conversation, become a team that we have to talk about more seriously on the bubble and into the NCAA tournament? Virginia Tech knocks off South Carolina. Not a lot there in terms of big impact, but Virginia Tech adds to the ACC's total, going to overtime in that game. They're a team that is also trying to strive towards the bubble. Can they get there? This is going to be an important result. If they had lost one to South Carolina, that would have been a major knock. Oklahoma knocks off Wake Forest in a convincing fashion, 18-point win for the Sooners. I think it's big for them because they are on the right side of things right now, but there's no guarantee through SEC play that they're going to string together a lot of results. It's going to be a nightly gauntlet. They're going to have to go out and continue to prove themselves over and over again. You give yourself a little bit of extra cushion when you pick up a win against an ACC team that could also find itself on the bubble in Wake Forest. You do it in convincing fashion, which of course helps the conference to conference comparisons that we were talking about here at the start of this segment, and just gives you a big boost as well in terms of all those metrics that we're going to discuss over the course of things. Texas A&M knocks off Pitt. Solid result for Texas A&M. Don't think it kills Pitt in any kind of way to have a single-digit loss there. Duke takes down Florida, and the Gators are struggling. They're struggling, and we're going to talk more in the last segment here today about what it is that is hurting them in these computer metrics, why they are continuing to fall down. But they played it tight. There's no doubt that they are a talented team that belongs in the conversation with these top teams. They just don't have the data to put forward in these head-to-head comparisons. And this is another chance where they drop it. Duke separates themselves. Duke continuing to look like there's no locks at this point in the season, but a pretty safe bet for a 1 seed as we get through things. Miami takes down Ole Miss in a game that Chris Beard was furious with his team's effort, but Miami is a team trending in the right direction. They have a loss to Florida earlier in this year, but to pick up a win against Ole Miss, this is another one where Miami is a team trying to surge back into the bubble conversation, trying to raise their stock in all of these computer models. And so to pick up a win against Ole Miss, another team that could be very much in that mix, be in that same conversation, it's going to be a head-to-head comparison, conference to conference, all those things that we're going to look at once we get late into the season when you're only playing your conference opponents, and we have to find ways to differentiate you from other teams outside of that data set. Georgia just dominates Florida State. It's looking like Florida State is going to struggle to get into the bubble conversation this year after some early success that looked like they could get things going a little bit. Look, give them time. It's a rebuild there. It just is, and it's going to be interesting to see, can they at least steady things and get things consistent down the stretch of this season. Notre Dame takes down Missouri. That's a big blow for Missouri as they try to continue building a conversation and keep themselves off the bubble by the end of the season. And we wrap up Tuesday's slate with North Carolina taking down Kentucky in Rupp Arena. This is the third quad one loss for Kentucky so far this season. They don't have a win in the top two quadrants. Another team that we'll talk about in the third segment, what all that means. But things are not going great for Kentucky right now. This roster does not look cohesive at times. There's struggles on the offensive end. There were times where it looked like Caleb Wilson was just by such a wide margin the best player on the floor. And then at times where it looked like North Carolina just had more talent in general. Between Henry Vasar in the middle, between the guard play late for the Tar Heels, they just grinded out a win against a top 25 opponent, against a team that is supposed to be in the mix for this top 16 conversation and has not delivered quite to this point. We'll see if they can turn it around, but there's still so much more for them to unpack before they get to that point this season. It's feeling like Kentucky is at a pivotal point in the season as they try to salvage this non-conference resume. Now, enough room in the SEC schedule that you can bounce back, but your hopes of being in that top 16 conversation, of hosting or at least being the top seed in a regional, those are beginning to slip and become much more difficult to achieve for this Kentucky team. Arkansas beats Louisville to kick off the Wednesday slate. Big win for the Razorbacks as they kind of bring themselves back up into the conversation with some of the top SEC teams. They had suffered a couple of losses to big opponents early in the season. They get a big win here, and I think it was just all around impressive. You held this Louisville team, forced them to be inefficient from the field, even on a night where Arkansas was not just tearing it up, shooting the ball, or even with their turnovers, just keeping the ball safe. They were able to just outperform another team that is considered one of the best in college basketball this season. So really impressive performance for them. They got that home court advantage. It came through in a big way. Really impressed with that win. Think it will serve them well. Alabama takes down Clemson. This one looks like it was going to get away. Then Clemson went on a very impressive run to force this down to the wire, made Alabama sweat this one out through the entire second half. Really impressed by the surge, honestly, by the Tigers. I thought that it was as big to that result in terms of my perception of both teams as anything else. Obviously, LeBaron Philon for Alabama deserves a ton of credit. This guy has been one of the best players in college basketball. I was having a conversation last night with somebody around the sport, and not sure there's a player who is performing better right now than LeBaron Philon. If you look at the statistics, the efficiency, the impact that he has on his team on both ends of the floor, you look at the value of the position that he plays, and then you also take a look at who he's doing it against. Alabama has played one of the toughest schedules in college basketball and will continue to do so through the non-conference schedule. There are no just easy games during this stretch for the Crimson Tide, and he is still putting up big numbers and doing so at increased efficiency this season. Really impressed with what he has done. He's putting his name firmly in the mix for the SEC Player of the Year and could be an All-American consideration as well very soon. LSU takes down Boston College in overtime. This is one that felt like LSU was flirting with danger. This is not a Boston College team that you can afford to take a loss to if you want to build an NCAA tournament resume, which, look, they invested this offseason. It's time. They need for McMahon to get this thing going, to get them into the postseason mix. Would have been real setback to face this loss, but they able to get it to overtime, able to separate in overtime and get a 9-point win by the time it's all said and done. So they survive, they advance. They're going to have to build a resume in conference play. They're going to have to prove that they can go out there against SEC competition and night in, night out, get results. You got to get at least close to 500 if you're going to get into the NCAA tournament. Vanderbilt with a big win, 19-point victory over SMU. The Commodores are for real. Now, they don't have the star power that some of the top teams have. I'm not sure how far I would pick them to go. I don't think that I would pick them as a Final Four team or in that mix, but this is a real threat to any team on any night. Vanderbilt is playing really good basketball under Mark Byington. They've got some solid players who contribute on both ends of the floor. They hit in an underrated way. I really thought that losing Jason Edwards was going to be a knock for this team. I dinged them pretty hard for losing that scoring punch, but they have just come out and figured out ways. It's been replaced in the aggregate. They have found out a good system to get everyone involved, to make sure that everyone is part of the success for this team. And they are delivering. And how about that Vanderbilt athletic program as a whole really just rising from the ashes, turning two programs that were struggling greatly for years and now having two fantastic programs, a football team that's on the edge of the bubble for the college football playoff, a basketball team that we're talking about as one of the favorites in the SEC suddenly this season. Really good job. And that's not to take anything away from SMU, who's done the same thing with their athletic program, jumping to the ACC, having early success across all sports there. These are two of the rising programs in college sports for sure. Virginia, we'll talk about getting a win in convincing fashion over Texas. Texas has been up and down so far this year. They're still getting things figured out, it feels like. Dalen Swain is their anchor. He is the consistent force. But other than that, there's a lot more to figure out across that roster. Be interesting to see how Sean Miller is able to do that. But Virginia, you look at it from their perspective, and man, what a win this is. You get that just a dominant performance against an SEC team. You improve all of your metrics in the process. You get more solid performances from your star players who have continued to make a name for themselves, have really risen themselves into the national conversation. This is just all around a big win for Virginia, pushes them forward into bigger and better conversations as the season continues, and they look to raise their stock towards the top of the conference and into higher seed lines as we go along. Mississippi State picks up a win against Georgia Tech, two teams that have really struggled early on in the season. Neither of them look particularly primed to make a bubble push unless one can get red hot in conference play or the conference tournament, of course, as we know, to seal an automatic bid. And the night ended with Auburn and NC State. Auburn picks up a 10-point win there. The Tigers, look, they haven't had the dominance that they had last year, but that was to be expected. A new look roster. They've overcome a slow start by Tahad Pettiford to the season and still been able to keep themselves in the top 25, keep themselves in the mix with things in terms of their resume, in terms of what we're looking at in their results. They've played some real tough competition. They've picked up some good wins. They've stayed competitive in some big games. I think this Auburn team is going to be all right. We're seeing more and more that this team is starting to figure things out. Really late coaching change. Obviously, a lot of continuity in that coaching change with Stephen Pearl taking over, but it's still, it's a big step up. You got to take that first seat on the bench. And for the first time, he is running things as the leader day to day. He looks like he's starting to settle into it, and the Tigers are getting good results. NC State, another one of these that I don't think it kills them to take this loss, but definitely would have been really nice to get on the resume for Will Wade here in his first season. When we come back on the other side, we're going to just quickly take you through a couple of the final games from the Players Era Festival that we missed talking about because of the Thanksgiving break. Right here on Three True Values, I'm your host, James Fletcher. Welcome back in here on Three True Values. We're talking about the Players Era Festival, those final two games that we got to see on Wednesday night. We'll start with the third place game. Kansas takes down Tennessee. They, without Darren Peterson, have started to get things clicking. It's been interesting because this is a team that we've talked about from the start is built around the star freshman. It is built to make him look good, to make him succeed. And there was a lot of concern early on when he went out with this leg injury that he's dealing with that uh, we're not quite sure on the timeline. Sounded like he might have been back this week, but now he's remains out, remains on the sideline. Seeing Flory Badunga have to take on an increased role, what was that going to look like? Melvin Council having to take on an increased role. Even Cole Rosario, one of their freshmen, what was he going to do? Was he going to have more of an impact, more on ball reps, given the injury to Peterson? There were a lot of questions that were left to be answered. They have answered them pretty well. They took a couple of losses. It looked like a conversation that we were going to have about how long can they survive without him. But things have started to turn and shift the correct direction. They beat a Tennessee team that, despite losing to Kansas, still raised up in the polls the next week because of their win against Houston. So you look at a team that had just knocked off Houston, you get the win over them. That's an impressive win to add to your resume early in this season for a Kansas team that is without its star player, its nucleus, the guy that this all spins around. And it's made you start to kind of look up and say, okay, Kansas, can you continue to deliver results? Can you continue to hold down the ship until Darren Peterson comes back, until he gets into full form? And then what does it look like? Because they've had to change the way that they do some things. There's a different system that they have to play with. Bill Self is having to coach the game different. Melvin Council, as I said, playing in a different role. Flory Badunga playing a little bit different role. Things have had to change to fill in the gaps, to create advantages without Peterson on the floor. And now we're going to have to kind of shift it back once he comes back into the lineup. I have no doubt that they'll be able to do that. We're just going to have to see what the adjustment period looks like, how well it works as you kind of shift pieces back and forth, because some of these guys have kind of established themselves now as, okay, we know his role. We know what he can do. So if we can keep him there, we would love to do that with Peterson added into the mix. Those are going to be kind of the conversations that have to be had. For Tennessee, though, it was really a close loss, so you're not going to pick it apart too seriously to a team that's in the top 25, that's, like I said, a really good basketball team. You didn't get an efficient scoring night from your star freshman, Nate Ament. Jacoby Gillespie didn't have one of his bigger nights of the season. And so I think if you're Tennessee, you kind of come out of it and you say, okay, we know that we can play better than that. We've got to play better than that. And you walk away thinking, next time we can get them. So no huge takeaways from the Tennessee side for me. I just think that you've got to get better shooting performances from your team to win games like that. But the championship game, now this one we have some takeaways about, because on last week's show, we were talking after the first two games. We had not seen the championship game yet, at least when it was recorded. And I had been getting questions. I had talked to some people about, is Gonzaga the best team in the country? They look really good, and their metrics all line up. They're at the top of KenPom. They're in the mix in all of these computer metrics. Are they the best team in college basketball? And off of a win against Alabama, off of another big win on Tuesday, I was tempted to say, maybe I wasn't ready to say yes, but I was ready to say they're in the conversation. Let's take a long, serious look. And then we took a long, serious look on Wednesday night and decided that no, they are not the best team in the country. You just simply can't hold that honor if you lose by 40 points to one of the other teams that is in the mix for that conversation. Michigan dominated the Players Era Festival. Absolute dominance, a 40-point win, a 30-point win, and then another 40-point win. This is a tournament that we talked about having some of the top teams in college basketball. Now, they didn't face the toughest schedule possible to get there, but still, I mean, leveled the competition, left no doubt in any of these games for Michigan to come out and have an average margin of victory above 35 points per game across a 3 game sample in 3 days. They went out there day after day on a neutral floor. And regardless of the opponent, regardless of how long before the game they even knew who they were playing, they handed it to whoever lined up on the other side. It has helped them to soar in the conversation in every computer metric. They, I think, had a real case to be number one in the AP poll this week. They were not. But if I was voting, I would have had them number one after that performance. They're only number three, which feels strange because I know that Arizona has established a great resume as well. But man, I mean, Arizona wasn't beating these teams by 40. And then Purdue, it's hard to argue against Purdue, preseason number one, hasn't slipped up, has looked the part in all of their big games that they played. But man, I mean, it's just really hard for me to go anywhere but Michigan when the first couple games of the season we said, oh, they're still figuring it out. They're still getting this rotation together, still figuring out which bigs they can play at the same time. No more. No, they have got it figured out. They look the part of a 1 seed. They look the part of a team that can dominate throughout the course of the season. Really interested to see how they build off of these performances over the past couple of weeks, how they continue to grow. Because you talk about 40-point wins over top 25 caliber teams, and then we start talking about growth over the course of the season. That's a scary proposition. This is a team that could really, really be a scary one heading into March if they can continue down this path that they are currently on. We'll see what Dusty May and that group are able to do. We love the front court there, of course. A lot of versatility, a lot of options that they have. We'll see how they continue to build on that. We'll see what that backcourt continues to grow into as well. Just keep an eye on Michigan. Because I'm not saying yet, I'm not ready to declare that they look like late season Florida last year, even. Definitely not ready to say that they look like that second national championship UConn team quite yet. But the signs are starting. It's the same kind of feeling from early on in both of those runs where you started to look and you started to say, okay, like this is different. Like they're not even playing close games. We'll see how it plays out over the rest of the year. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit of bracketology, get you out of here with the games of the week right here on 3 True Values. Welcome back in here on 3 True Values as we wrap up today's show for you. We got a bracketology update. You can check out the latest projections at on 3. All my work there, of course. Also did a breakdown of the ACC SEC challenge, what it means for bracketology. So if you're interested in how some of these early season results can impact the final bracket, impact the way that we view these two different conferences, you can go check that out as well as the full bracket, which released on Monday of this week. Typically, we put it out Sundays and Thursdays, but this week on Monday, because of the net ranking release, which came out, also did a kind of a breakdown comparing the AP poll to the net rankings, if that's something that you're interested in reading more about. Follow all of my content with Bracketology covering the college basketball 4-on-3. Be sure to stay locked in there. Right now, the one seed line is pretty clear to me. Michigan is the number one overall seed. They have the best resume on paper. They've got the quadrant system check box to prove it. They are number one in multiple computer numbers. The eye test definitely looks like it's there. Offensive efficiency, defensive efficiency, all those things, they all check out. And so I think that this is a Michigan team that has earned this top spot to this point. Now they have to hold on to it. That's always the challenge in bracketology. Duke comes in at number two, real steady force here. I think they've been number two the entire time that we've been doing this, or at least number two or number three. They are right up there in the mix. This is a Duke team that they are who we thought they are. Continue to string together big results, continue to put together that non-conference resume. Purdue comes in at number three. They've done no wrong to this point. They just keep churning out results. They don't have as many impressive or as many dominant wins necessarily as a Michigan or Duke so far. That's what's keeping them at third in this latest update. And then Houston, who suffered a setback right on the cusp there, but they're still Houston. We still have some preseason data in the model right now. We still have some historic data in the mix there that has to be taken into account. And all of that suggests Houston is just fine. This team still eye test, they pass it. They just took a loss. They just had a couple of down performances from an efficiency standpoint. I don't have any serious concerns about Houston at this point. I think that as there's more data put into these models, they're going to continue to rise back up and be right here in this one seed mix throughout the season. UConn and Iowa State are two teams that I want to touch on, though, that are on that 2-3 line in that mix. I think both will probably come out as two seeds in our next update, if I had to guess right now, which will be out 1 week from now. We're going to be updating that bracket, I believe, next Thursday. So we'll have some fresh data to talk about there. UConn is one that I have had right at the top of the 3 seed line. And that was because of some of the predictive data, some of the historic data that gets folded in there. I think that they've had a good resume to this point. They've continued to string in some big wins along the way, continued to add to what they have. I think that that's going to continue to push them up, continue to take them from 3 more into the 2 talk. But the margins are really thin in that area from really 6 through 10. Or even 5, I should say, through 10. 6 teams that are in that mix. It's pretty close between them all on that 2-3 line. Results will shift throughout the season. Obviously, we'll have more teams enter the mix trying to get into that conversation. But I think that it's going to be very upward trajectory for UConn over these next couple of weeks. Iowa State, another one that, man, TJ Otzelberger, he's got this figured out. He's got the computer models figured out. That's just the fact of the matter. You go out and you win by 100 points, and the computers love it. And so if you're going to play a quad 3 or a quad 4 game, make it a team that you can dominate. And he has done that. But he's not scared to go play big games too. They've got a game coming up against Purdue that we'll talk about here in a second. They've played a couple of top 25 games already to this point. They've had good results. This is a team that's going to keep climbing. They're going to stay in the mix, I think, for one of these top seeds. Be definitely in the top 16 conversation. Don't see them dropping out of that unless they really hit a rough stretch here at some point during the conference portion of the schedule. But on the other hand, we talked about 2 rising teams. I want to talk about 2 teams that are falling. Kentucky and Florida. Kentucky, the efficiency numbers are still down. They have no resume to speak of in terms of quad 1 and quad 2. They're 0-3 in quad 1 games. Haven't played a quad 2 game yet. So still winless in those top quadrants. That's just not going to get you into the top 16 conversation. You have to build a resume. Now they have SEC play. Of course, they're going to string together wins. They're going to have quad one wins. They're going to have quad two wins. I'm not concerned that they won't have any. The question becomes if you want to be on these top two, three, even the top 16 overall seeds, you have to have the non conference resume along with the conference resume. Because when we were talking earlier about conference to conference, that's going to matter here as well. Kentucky having no notable wins outside of the conference could, if anything, hurt the overall strength, at least in terms of the data the SEC has. Now, that's going to be a problem. So, what can they do down the stretch here to get things righted, to get things headed in the right direction? They need a strong finish to the month of December. Florida, another team that is struggling right now. And the biggest issue that they've been competitive in games. They've picked up even some wins along the way. But the biggest issue that we've seen so far from this Florida team is the inefficiency of the backcourt, particularly on the offensive end. They just have not shot the ball well, and that kills half of your rating in a lot of these computer metrics. So what can Florida do? They've got to figure out that backcourt situation if they're going to get back up into this one seed conversation that we thought that they would be in early in the year, even to get back into the 2 and 3 seed mix. It's going to take better efficiency from that backcourt because the front court is solid, but in this game, you got to have guards, you got to have centers. Particularly in the college game, those two things are non-negotiables to playing efficient basketball. And if you want the commuters to love you, you've got to be efficient throughout the season. We'll see how that continues to play out if they're able to get that consistency. Look, there's a lot of talent in that backcourt. There's no question about it. They went out and got some highly coveted guys in the transfer portal. The fit has been a question. And so far, the adjustment period going from one spot to another has been an issue as well for those new guards. We'll see if they can continue to head in the right direction. That's what they're going to have to do here throughout the course of the season. Let's get you out of here with the games of the week. We're wrapping up today's show tonight on Thursday. No top 25 games, but that's okay because we've got Utah State, who is a real contender in the Mountain West Conference, against South Florida, a team that's looking to make some noise under first-year coach Brian Hodgson, seeing if they can get into the American conversation and try to get an automatic bid at some point this year. On Friday, we've got Gonzaga versus Kentucky. Doesn't get much better than that. If you're Kentucky, you've got to right the ship. How about this as a great opportunity to do so? But if you lose it, that's another opportunity down the drain. I mean, you can't keep taking losses in this non-conference schedule. They've got to get one. This is a big opportunity right here. On Saturday, we're going to go with Purdue against Iowa State. Just talked about Iowa State, how they've got this system figured out. If they can keep things close, if they can get a win against Purdue, watch out. They're going to soar. But even if they keep things close, that's kind of the model here is when you play really bad teams, beat them by as many points as you can. When you play really good teams, as long as you play them close, it's not going to ding you in a major way in these models. On Sunday, we've got Kansas and Missouri. Some real hate in this rivalry. We're going to see it renewed once again on the hardwood. Just fascinated to see how that plays out. We'll see if Darren Peterson is back as well. That would be huge for this Kansas team as they round out the non-conference schedule. Texas and Southern is going to be our game on Monday. Yes, there's very few options to pick from. So I said, all right, Texas, a team that looks like they're inching around the bubble. They're kind of going to be in that mix. So a team worth watching throughout the year. And Southern, a team that's a perennial NCAA tournament team. They seem to always be in the mix for an automatic bid out of that conference. So let's give them an early look. Let's see what they look like. Can they do it again this year? UConn facing Florida on Tuesday night. Much better slate of games here. We've got a big top 25 matchup, a chance for Florida to get things headed back in the right direction, a chance for UConn to absolutely stamp themselves as a 2 seed and potentially work their way closer and closer to a 1 seed conversation as well. And on Wednesday, the last day before we will speak with you again, we've got Wisconsin facing Nebraska. Nebraska undefeated to this point. They got a couple of big games coming up, a couple of opportunities to really build their resume out and show that this early season run of form is something that they're going to continue and that they're going to be a force come March Madness time. We'll be back next week right here on Three True Values. We will have 5-star values with Jamie Shaw coming up on Tuesday as well. You're not going to want to miss it. Stay locked in here. Follow, like, subscribe, whatever it is you got to do. Keep up to date with the work we're putting out. We're keeping you informed on all things college basketball right here on Three True Values. Thanks for tuning in.